when we hear the word prospecting, I always think of an ancient prospector out looking for gold. And that's really what we all have in our minds when we say it's time to do some prospecting. You know, let's talk about who our top prospects are. And so today we're going to talk about 6 steps to finding your best prospects. 6 ways to mine for gold. So step 1, believe it or not, is stop prospecting. There's an article in the downloads for you after this webinar that really changed things for me. Oh, you can't see my screen, says Megan Jeffries. Can you see it now? No. Oh, that's so frustrating. Okay. So we're going to talk about prospecting, mining for gold. And I think when we think of this term, it brings to mind the idea of the old settler in the late 1800s out panning for gold in the Wild West. And we pan for gold at our clubs every day. We say, who's a good prospect? How do we find a good prospect? So today we're going to talk about 6 steps to finding your best prospects. Step 1 is going to seem a little bit crazy, but I promise that it works. Stop prospecting. There was an article that came out earlier this year, which is available in your downloads, from the Veritas Group. They do a great blog. They're consultants who really do some of the best writing I've seen on resource development. And they say, stop prospecting. And here's why. Think about how much time we spend at board meetings saying, you know who has money? You know who just made a gift to the Children's Museum? You know who I think just gave a gift to the hospital? I hear so-and-so just came into some money. Tons of time doing that, right? But we aren't actually acting upon that. We're just talking about it. And just coming up with people who have money, as you'll see during this webinar, is really only one aspect of prospecting. And if we spend all of our time trying to come up with new prospects, we're not doing what's really at the heart of resource development, which is working with the prospects that we already have. Think about it this way. The people who are already in your database have already showed themselves to be good prospects because they're already willing to give you money. They already know your mission, whether they've been to a special event, been to the club, have a friend that asked them to give. One way or another, you've already got them partially qualified. They'll give you money. They care about kids. They know about the club. And researchers estimate that most nonprofit organizations only are achieving about 20% of the full capacity in their database. In other words, you could earn 80% more money with the prospects that you already have. So read this article, share this article with your board. I tacked it onto another article because I can only put a certain number of downloads for each of these webinars. So it's just the first page. Read that over and see what you think. Is it time to stop prospecting? If you think it's not time to stop prospecting, or you need to find some prospects, we are going to talk a little bit about that. So where do you find good prospects besides, as we've already said, your database? You can do step 2, which is asking your board members and volunteers to complete a Circle of Influence form. This is available in your downloads, and this is a really good activity to do with your board when they say, I don't know anybody, I'm not connected to anybody. Because when they sit down and think about themselves as an agent of the club and who they're connected with, all of a sudden they'll start to realize, well, I do have a friend who's a newscaster, that could be helpful. Or I used to work with so-and-so and I know he gives a lot to the YMCA. I do have a couple people at church who might be involved. So get your board members to come up with a Circle of Influence form. Then collect those, look them over, and think about who might be good for you to start to prospect with and work with a little bit more. Chances are there will be some overlap with people your board is connected to and people who have already made small gifts, and those would be great prospects. The reason those would be great prospects is that they have all 3 of the things that I'm going to refer to as the A team. So your very best prospects have 3 things. They all start with A, very handy to remember. They have ability, you have access, and they have affinity. Ability means that they have the financial wherewithal to make a significant gift to your organization. That's usually where we stop when we do prospect, prospect, prospect. People will just keep saying, you know, who has money? But remember that having money does not equal generosity. Some of the most generous people in our nation actually are the poor. Now, I'm not saying that every prospect you go after should be someone who's economically challenged. I'm just saying that everyone who's wealthy is not necessarily generous. And so we need to also be sure that not only do they have the ability to make a gift, but that they're willing to be generous with their income. Next is access. Is someone connected to this person? Can someone get you in to see this person? Do they have a connection to a board member, a volunteer, one of your staff? If so, you have access. Because what you don't want to be doing are cold calls, where you say, well, nobody knows this person, but I hear they have money, so I'm just going to call them. First of all, cold calls are really uncomfortable for you and for the prospect. And second of all, they're not successful. Just calling someone from out of the blue is not going to yield you a great prospect. So then the third thing that your prospect should have is affinity. In other words, do they care about kids? Do they care about youth-serving organizations? And even better, do they have club love? This might be an alumnus. It might be someone who's been through for a tour. It could be someone who's volunteered for you in the past. But your very best prospects reside in this golden triangle, which is the intersection of ability, access, and affinity. And when you're trying to decide where you want to devote the small amount of time that you have available to prospect development, be sure you pick people who have all three of these, or you're probably just going to be spinning your wheels. Now, as you're qualifying donors during step 3 of choosing good prospects, be sure to disqualify donors as well. So how do you disqualify a donor and take them out of your caseload? Well, if you keep calling and calling and calling and asking someone for a meeting and they never call you back, chances are pretty good that they're not interested. Maybe you move them to just annual contact. Maybe you take them out entirely. You talk to someone and they say, you know what, we really only support animal organizations. They have disqualified themselves as your donor, and you can take them out of the list. So a lot of times we'll keep those wealthy people in the list just because they have money. But if we don't have access and affinity to, and they're not interested in working with the club, don't spend your time and resources on them. Love the ones you're with, those people in your database or the people who meet that golden triangle. The next thing you're going to do, now that you've chosen those key top prospects, and these are really the kinds of prospects that you want to develop for those larger gifts, is assemble a team. Now, this team is probably only going to get together a couple of times. It could be phone calls that you're using to have these teams. But what you're doing is a prospect development team. And let's say, for example, we're going to do this over the phone. And let's say that we realize that Steve Johnson has ability, access, and affinity, and he's really a great prospect. We're all going to get on the phone. Me, as the development director, I'm going to get the CEO, probably the chair of the RD committee, and then whoever the person is that's connected to Steve. And we're going to have a quick phone call to talk about the best way to approach this person. Ideally, he's already connected to the club. He's been to an event. He's been to a tour, which makes it much easier. But we're going to actually decide what our strategy is for starting to cultivate and do discovery with this person. A lot of times we sort of identify someone and ask them for a gift. That happens a lot in Boys and Girls Clubs. Identify, ask, identify, ask. When you do that, you're really skipping qualify, discover, and cultivate. So you need to take all of those steps, and this team will kind of start developing a strategy. Once the strategy is developed, you as the CEO or the director of development can keep people in line in terms of them doing all of their responsibilities and following through on this strategy. So the next thing that you're going to do, you can do independently as the CEO or the development director, which is once you've decided who those key prospects are for major gifts, once you've decided who your team is and you have a strategy put together, now it's time to start doing some research. And certainly we've all Googled donors. Most of you probably look them up, their homes up on Zillow or on your county assessor's website. There are lots of other really outstanding sources of information about donors out there, ways that you can find out about their political giving, some of their stock value, you can estimate their salary, and a lot of other things. So those are all contained in one of the handouts that you can download after the webinar as well. And you can go through doing that research on them. Now, I will mention, a lot of times we'll do research as a procrastination technique. Like, I don't want to pick up the phone and make the call, so I'm just going to do some more research on this person. But I'm going to tell you the best way to research is to get in front of your donor and talk to them face to face. And that's where you'll really find out things that would never be available on the internet. You might learn about their childhood experiences at the club. You might learn about why they feel it's important that kids live healthy lifestyles, or how creating great citizens feeds into their own business plan, or how upset they are about hunger in your community. None of those are things that you could find by just doing research. So the best way to research really is go and see your donor. Now, after you've kind of conducted your preliminary research, you have had a strategic team get together to talk about what you're going to do with this prospect, and you may have even seen them face to face as part of your qualification and discovery. It's time to sort of focus down and create a plan and a profile. There's a handout for you from the Foundation Center that lets you develop a detailed prospect profile. You wouldn't want to put these together on those prospects who you're asking for $100 or $500. You would want to do all of this more intense kind of prospecting, researching, strategic development on those major gift donors in your profile. And I promise there are major gift donors in your profile. In your database. It may seem that there aren't because you're not getting those major gifts, but that may be because you're not approaching development with them in a strategic way. It may be because you're not going through all of the necessary steps. So let's review those steps. First, stop prospecting. Look first to the people who are in your database, because there are people in there who have the capacity to make major gifts. Next, if you need to develop more prospects and find more people to talk to, develop a circle of influence forum with your clubs, with your board member at your clubs. Your boards can tell you who is capable of making the gift, who they're connected to. Next, be sure to choose good prospects, those people who are in the A team with ability, access, and affinity. After that, once you've selected your really key prospects, assemble a team or teams to discuss these prospects, what their interests are, what's known about them, the best way to approach, strategic steps you might take. Then, do some research. The best research is seeing your prospect face to face, but there's also a lot of great DIY prospect research that you can do to get an idea of their ability. A lot of people worry about not having enough information on the ability of their prospect and under or over asking. I will tell you that by the time you've gotten to where you're going to ask your prospect for a major gift, a lot of that will have become more clear simply by the kinds of things they're asking you about. If I'm working with a donor for a year or so and they're asking me about building projects, I know that they're in the 6- and 7-figure gifts. But if they're asking me about something smaller, like, I would love to be able to help provide a new stove for your meals program, I know that I'm looking at more like a 4- or 5-figure gift. Lastly, focus by creating a plan and a profile. You know who this person is and you know what you're going to do with them. Those are really the 6 steps. There are handouts for you that you can download. Here's my contact info. It's in the handouts, and you're welcome to call or email me anytime if you'd like to discuss this further. Here's the resources to download. All of these, I hope, will answer questions that you might have about prospecting, help you to be a little bit better in prospect development when you get to the point that you know who you want to talk to, and will serve as a reminder that you've already got some great prospects out there hiding in your database. I encourage you to go and dig for gold and see what you can find. So with that, we are concluded.